Kind of a cliche, but it doesn't make it any less true. The weakest link is the human being. And it's funny because even in a fairly recent Tom Cruise movie, Mission Impossible, they're talking, well, can we just take everything offline? Well, even if we do, still the weakest link is the human. And somehow, some way, the adversary's going to get in. And I also think that the majority of small, medium-sized business owners are still operating under an assumption that those that would come after them is some 15-year-old kid in the basement of their parents' house. And again, the data does not support that in any way, shape, or form.
Welcome to Do Small Business Like a Big Boss, where we explore the real stories, hard-earned lessons, and game-changing strategies of entrepreneurs who've moved beyond the side hustle and built businesses that scale with confidence. This show is proudly sponsored by Project Icon. I'm your host, Aisha Jorge Massengill, your small business legal guide. Let's dive in. Hey bosses, welcome to Do Small Business Like a Big Boss. I am your host, Aisha Jorge Massengill, and I am absolutely thrilled to have Carter Schoenberg here, who's our Vice President of Cybersecurity and the Chief Cybersecurity Officer for SoundWay Consulting. Welcome, Carter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, people may not think that this is a natural fit for small business owners to be concerned about, but I wanted to start with your origin story, starting from the beginning a little bit. How does someone end up becoming a chief cybersecurity officer?
Great question. So many people in cyber come to it one of two ways, either from an IT background or actually from a military background. I actually left a career as a homicide detective in 2000, was fortunate enough to be exposed to some of the best and the brightest with a company called Internet Security Systems, which eventually got bought out by IBM. And by focusing on what I wanted to accomplish as an end state with a progressive career path, evaluated and outlined a strategic course of not only helping government, but helping industry, government at federal, state, and local levels. And in addition to that, increasing my level of education with professional certifications and continuous process improvement, things like masterclass and things that pertain to professional business development and professional skills that have to be honed over the course of anybody's professional career.
So I can't help but pause when you say a homicide, you worked in homicide. How did you get into homicide? And then how do you then pivot? What was it that said, I don't want to do this? And I have some thoughts about why someone would want to pivot, but what made you pivot into particular cybersecurity?
So at the time, the general progression in law enforcement when you're coming out of uniform into the criminal investigative division, CID, is general burglary, maybe auto theft, something along those lines. And then you have a natural progression up to homicide. And I was fortunate at the time that I was offered the opportunity to leapfrog directly from uniform to homicide. My first preference would have been the white collar crime squad, but the white collar crime squad was not fully operationalized at that point. So I had a decision to make, and I decided to go from uniform to detective division. And one of the things that I wouldn't expect the general viewer to know is, at least in the United States, statistically speaking, for every 20 homicides, 18 somehow, some way is narcotic related. One is domestic violence. One is wrong person, wrong place, wrong time. And we, meaning the investigative unit that I was associated with, we were becoming rapidly more familiar with individuals that were moving away from narcotics to computer crime because you can make one just as much money, if not more. And equally, if not more importantly, the laws, and for time frame, we're talking late 1990s, the laws had not successfully evolved to successfully prosecute the individuals, even if law enforcement made an arrest. So the idea of focusing on a one-to-many crime versus a one-to-one crime just seemed more intellectually stimulating to me.
Well, if you've done nothing else for me, I was a huge fan of the TV show The Wire, and they always talked about CID. So now you've solved that mystery for me, because I just took them on face value of that it was an important division in the police department, and now we know what that is. But going back to your pivot to the cybersecurity, I thought it was interesting that you have these dual titles, and maybe you can help me understand the importance of having that chief. So you have the vice president part, but then you are the chief. So for you, do you see your role differently because of the chief role versus the VP role, or is that just a distinction without a difference?
There is a clear distinction. So for context for your listeners and your viewers, I have two distinct responsibilities. I'm directly responsible for our own internal corporate cyber posture, And I'm also responsible for the design, implementation, and management of our forward facing professional and managed services. So the forward facing, that's where the vice president title comes into play. And with respect to the chief cybersecurity officer, naming convention desired by the CEO of the company, but you can think of that as your traditional chief information security officer or CISO. That is where I'm directly responsible for our own corporate infrastructure and risk management program.
Interesting. Now, my listeners are primarily small business owners or entrepreneurs who may think that cybersecurity is really a concern for the big guys. Can you maybe tell us what's the wake up call that you would want an entrepreneur to think about with respect to this area and why it's important no matter the size of your organization?
So, with respect to that position by SMB owners, actually, the data does not support it. Actually, the data supports quite the opposite.
Wow.
And the rationale is the adversaries understand that the small, medium sized businesses, the SMB verticals, one, they're not paying attention to this. Two, and even if they did, they don't have the financial or human resources to be able to effectively address an adequate response. So what I continuously hear is, I'm too small for anybody to really care about. What are they going to really, do with my system? And what's interesting is one of the core service offerings that we provide at SoundWay is actually a new regulatory obligation by the Defense Industrial Base called CMMC, which stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is now an effective obligation to not only primes, but there's a flow down clause that impacts all of their subcontractors, regardless if you're a 500-person company or two guys in a garage. And that flow down clause basically stipulates that you are now going to have to demonstrate conformance with a NIST special publication, and that special publication has 320 different things that are going to have to be independently inspected. And for context, the government estimates that there's a little over 300,000 defense contractors. Roughly 120,000 of those will have to be independently certified. So almost half. And again, it is not relevant to the Department of Defense. I apologize. The Department of War. I still have to get used to that. But from the government's perspective, they really don't care what size you are. They have promoted this since 2019. And for organizations that take the position it's too cost intensive or it's too problematic, they don't care. Time is up. Now, with regards to general cybersecurity best practices, it's kind of a cliche, but it doesn't make it any less true. The weakest link is the human being. And it's funny because even in a fairly recent Tom Cruise movie, Mission Impossible, they're talking, well, can we just take everything offline? Well, even if we do, still the weakest link is the human. And somehow, some way, the adversaries can get in. And I also think that the majority of small, medium-sized business owners are still operating under an assumption that those that would come after them is some 15-year-old kid in the basement of their parents' house. And again, the data does not support that in any way, shape, or form. Criminal syndicates have corporatized hacking at scale. And as a result of that capability, these are very well funded, very well trained, in many cases supported directly by nation states like China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, Belarus, and others. One of the things that a friend of mine who is actually a state CISO made reference to, if you're an SMB, a small, medium-sized business, and even if you're confident that you have good, let's forget adequate, that you have good cybersecurity, he likens that to you're a little league baseball team. Now, you may have a great little league baseball team. You may even win the Little League World Series, but you are going to lose to the New York Yankees every game. So it's that level of context of who's actually wanting to come after you and why would they want to come after you. Sure, there's opportunities for ransomware, trying to hold somebody hostage, for understanding what their insurance policy may pay out. But generally speaking, depending on what the nature is of what you do, if you're in manufacturing, understanding some core elements of the clients that you are supporting may be beneficial to the adversary. If you are directly responsible for payroll administration that is directly associated with human resource databases that have names, social security numbers, potentially personal health information, you're then able to kind of like triangulate all
Hmm.
these things. Going back 11 years, there was a very famous breach that happened with the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB breach. And then about less than a year later, there was a Blue Cross Blue Shield breach. One of the things that I had started to connect the dots on even in advance of the majority of the well-recognized stakeholders is if you think about, in this case, both cases, it was China that was behind those attacks. Their Ministry of State Security, otherwise known as MSS, they are always actively looking to be able to identify who's the weak link that we may be able to flip to our side. And it's not just limited to China. US does it too. That's just the way espionage works. However, they are always going to know who are their primary targets. So kind of give you an example. We would love to be able to go after this 2-star general. But you know what? He's 2-star spangled patriotic. We are never going to flip him. So why bother? But now we have additional information from the Blue Cross Blue Shield breach. Ooh, guess what? Your daughter has an incurable disease, but we have the cure over here in China. And you just happen to be part of an Iron Dome program, and all we want is some information in exchange for that. So the ability of being able to connect what the adversary is actually going to be looking for better positions small, medium-sized business owners for what they should really be looking at in terms of reality. And frankly, part of this blame is not just limited to the business owners. It's also to security practitioners as well. I've been in this realm now for 25 years, and statistically, the needle has not really changed a lot. So you have to ask the question, is it really that business owners don't care? Or has the threat landscape really not be communicated in a way that resonates with them to make them understand why they would want to take action? And I would probably argue that the majority of the circumstances it's the latter.
So you've given me a lot to unpack there because you started talking about the people being a huge vulnerability, that you could have all the best practices in place, but there's always that people thing. And as I was doing some reading on you, I've seen that you talk about it's not just an IT issue. So I have more of an HR background. How does HR work with IT to help keep the company secure? What are some of the best practices that can be adopted by those folks and even by employees to help keep things secure?
No, it's a great question. And oddly enough, with regards to the new obligations I made reference to for the cybersecurity maturity model certification, there are actually a number of controls that are directly relevant and pertain to personnel security, specifically to, do you have a repeatable onboarding process? Meaning, do you just hire somebody and give them the computer and woohoo, off to the races you go? Or is there a vetting process before you're going to let that individual actually have access to your system resources? Does your organization have any type of awareness and training for cybersecurity, just general best practices? And is that a requirement before you will let the individual have access to your system resources? So that's part of the onboarding. Now let's talk about lateral and termination. I hear still way too often, even as we approach 2026, seeing cases time and time again where an individual was terminated, but yet their account is still showing active in the system directory. I'm also familiar with cases where that access, because it wasn't terminated, was able to be compromised post-termination. So it's one of those types of situations where I think as human beings, we tend to think the bad apple is really, really far and few between. And statistically speaking, I don't think that the numbers have changed. It's generally 7 or 8% of the overall enterprise on any given time is going to be more than happy to act as an insider threat. So when I'm talking about an insider threat, I'm talking about people that intentionally want to cause harm to your organization. Now, what's interesting, Aisha, about the concept of insider threat, the majority of cybersecurity incidents that have been reported, I think they say like roughly 80% somehow, some way are insider related. But 65+% of that 80+% is completely unintentional. But if the end result is still your system is down, you've lost money, some type of causation of harm has arose, what difference does it make? So understanding what types of processes you might want to have in place for if an individual is going to be transferred within an organization and having a business need to continue access to specialized resources or privileged account status like a system administrator, or if an individual is getting ready to be offboarded, whether they are deciding that they want to leave on their own accord or the decision has been made that unfortunately, right, wrong, or different, things aren't working out and we're going to go ahead and terminate. Especially if you're an SMB and you're a one-man shop for IT, how do you go about even thinking about doing that? Because if you terminate the IT person, how do you prevent yourself from having everybody get locked out?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these are some things that SMBs need to really take to heart and think through. And I would also probably say that the majority of small, medium-sized businesses, they're now heavily relying upon what the term is an external service provider, such as an MSP for IT or an MSSP for cybersecurity, and just blindly signing off on the service level agreements. Well, I know I need to do this. I don't have the bandwidth to do it, so just make it happen. But do you even know what you're getting? I mean, SLAs are written to benefit the service provider, not
Right.
the organization receiving the services. And unfortunately, the majority of organizations and individuals, whether they're micro and nano-sized businesses, they don't know what they don't know. And as a result, they are getting work products that are probably adding very little material value to reducing their risk posture.
So it's interesting. A lot of the things that you talked about at the last company that I ever worked for, they actually didn't cut off some of my access. And I kept telling them because it was actually interfering with my ability to connect with other things because it kept defaulting to their system. And it was frustrating me because they couldn't figure out how to shut it off from their end. And so I was going nuts. But one of the things that comes up, and this, it may just be a side thing, but as an employment attorney, I get asked all the time, should we get the laptop back from the employee who's departing? I know in some organizations you can do a remote wipe, and so maybe you're less concerned, but in your view, is there the chance that they've downloaded information to the hard drive that's still valuable? Just generally speaking, should employers worry about snatching back that laptop from a cyber perspective?
I think that's going to be on a case by case basis. I do think if we are talking about an individual that is going to be terminated or even a reduction in force, even if it's going to be a temporary solution, before that notification is triggered, a operational process, however that's going to be defined case by case basis, where the physical hardware itself, providing that's the limitation to gain access, is in fact back in the control of the organization itself. If you are allowing bring your own device type of infrastructure and you're leveraging an external service provider like an MSP or something along those lines, being able to have a game plan, not only a game plan, but test that game plan. Is it operationalized to the way that you understand that it is going to happen in that type of crisis event where somebody is saying, you know what, I found a better job, I won the lottery, kiss off, mic drop, whatever. But being able to war game out a variety of different circumstances where even if the end user, the system administrator, let's pick on, even if he or she is not going to do something malicious, they're just like, I'm done, mic drop, I'm out. What do you do then? Because these are the only individuals that have privileged account status in your system. You're not going to be able to do anything at that point as the business owner.
So
And the
let's
amount of additional costs to have a third party come in and then regain control, we're not talking a several $100 engagement there. You're talking a several $1,000 engagement there.
So I want to pull the string on that a little bit because while I think folks may not be able to be nimble enough to respond when the crap has hit the fan, if you know that you're about to terminate someone and you're concerned about things that they may or may not do within your systems or on the physical machine, what are some of the best practices that small business owners can adopt if they know, hey, next week we're going to be terminating this person? What are some of the things that they should be thinking about and the steps that they should be taking?
I would say first, making sure that your C-suite is actively involved with your human resources division, that you have an established game plan on what that transition out strategy is going to look like. Meaning on day one, the decision is made. On day two, human resources is creating the documentation for the offboarding of John or Jane Doe. On day 5, we are going to have John or Jane Doe come into the HR office. And while that is happening, some other individual will go and physically secure the laptop in question.
I want to pivot again to a small business owner drinking from the fire hose, trying to handle all the things. They're moving super duper fast. And you come in as the party pooper, as I think I read in an article, and say, hey, we need to have greater discipline or best practices. And we need to pump the brakes a little bit. How do you balance security with keeping business momentum? Because I know as a lawyer who's worked in-house for decades, that's often the pushback that we get. Like, we understand that you have expertise and we value that, but you're slowing the business down. How do you respond from the cyber perspective to those calls of you're slowing the business down?
So I would provide to your audience from a level of context that while I hear about these types of stories, I've yet to see these types of real world scenarios to the point where it's materially relevant. If somebody is now being forced to use multi-factor authentication and they are now having to take, excuse me, an additional 10 to 15 seconds out of their life to push a button, unless you are working on a cure for cancer or you are working in a nuclear missile silo, your time is not that valuable. So the reality of the situation is there's a lot of general griping for the sake of griping. But I will say that generally speaking, most organizations, at least since I've been with SoundWay and other organizations, when we are conveying the material benefit to the company, then it starts to be realized in terms of why they want to take these actions in the first place. And for context, we have helped a number of small companies, meaning 5, 10 person size companies. Now, the impetus may be that they no longer have a choice because Uncle Sam is forcing their hand. But once we create the program for them, they start to understand the value of what, how, and why they are now taking these actions. We at Soundway were leveraging a model that I designed several years ago when I used to work at Motorola, where we're able to actually do a cost benefit analysis on any material weakness that we are identifying. And I don't mean using third parties like Ponymon or stuff like that. We are actually using highly attributable data that is being brought to our attention from the executive team. And oddly enough, Aisha, one of the things I will share with you is usually the largest champion at the end of the day is not the director of IT and it's not the sysadmin. It's usually the CEO or the CFO
Hmm.
because we are putting into context what is your exposure left of boom versus right of boom in relationship to earnings, revenue, and free cash flow. We can talk about cybersecurity for the sake of saying, well, you need to be secure. I'm not trying to be curt, but my response isn't any less accurate. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't put a business context to why you are going to do something. Don't bother doing it, which is why sometimes I see people focusing on an investment strategy that is well above and beyond what they really need to do. And in many cases, they're investing in ways that are not operationally prudent, meaning buying new technologies when they're not even fully maximizing the technologies that they are currently have already paid for. So it's that level of, do you really understand what you have and what you need versus chasing the shiny new widget?
Yeah, and I think that that's something that translates across industries. Being able to demonstrate the value add to something is really critically important to sell it, right? And I think whether you're in a compliance space or sales space, you have to be able to sell the service that you're providing. So thank you for that. The topic of the day is all things AI, artificial intelligence. And so I'm curious from your perspective, as someone who thinks about security all day, are there things that keep you up at night about how businesses are adopting AI?
I'm not going to say it keeps me awake at night. I will say that I am cautiously optimistic on the implementation and advancements on artificial intelligence. I do think that there is a faster than anticipated adoption for the use of AI. I think that in the grand scheme, at least by the conclusion of 2025, what people think AI can do versus what it can't do now, there's a pretty big disparity. There's a pretty significant gap there. What I do think is going to be of concern for any organization is one, when you're using these types of tools, as an example, you may be familiar with a tool called Fireflies. So Fireflies is widely used by many organizations, regardless of size. And it is transcribing all elements from a Zoom call, a team session, Google Meets, or even a session like a webinar like we are on today.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the nature of the sensitivity of the materials being covered in that session, you've lost control of it. It is now in a third party repository that you have absolutely no control or say how it's actually being used. There are organizations that are standing up their own internal AI instances that gives them better control and better fidelity of the actual data. Some of your viewers may have heard about the term of like hallucinations. Still very, very prominent to this date. I have been to conferences where I have seen government contracting officers and officials kind of chuckle at the fact that they are seeing AI written responses
Mm,
to RFIs and RFPs written completely in AI. And what they were chuckling about was it's not that they were necessarily against the use of AI, but if you're going to use AI, try to do your best to make it not look like AI,
right.
where like the little squirrel icon or something like that from
Mhm.
ChatGPT is still present. And if you're going to be submitting a formal proposal to the United States government or state government or local government, these are things that kind of get picked up. I do think that artificial intelligence will be significant drivers in the manufacturing sector. I do think that they will also be highly useful in advanced medicine, nuclear sciences, things like that. But the converse of that is we told people 3 years ago, if you want to have a secure job, go take a degree, a college degree in coding.
Mm,
That is all now but gone the way of the dinosaur.
right, 'cause it provides the coding now.
Yeah, we are seeing time and time again entry level cybersecurity jobs. Well, why are we going to pay a human being to do that when we feel that AI can do that? Okay, why do you feel AI can do that? Because this sales engineer convinced us we could do it that way. So I think we're in for a very rude awakening with regards to what unemployment levels are going to look like with companies trying to improve their top and bottom lines by
Mhm.
reducing staff and trying to automate things more. But in so doing, I think, and this is just Carter's prediction, I think what we're going to see is not too dissimilar to what Michael Dell learned about outsourcing service calls to India. The bottom line up front was in the 1990s, early 2000s, most US companies were more than happy to outsource all of their service calls to India because it was a lower cost of ownership per hour. What Michael Dell was able to determine from some analysis that I believe was done by a third party, I can't remember, but I think it was a big four consulting firm. Yes, the individual hourly rate is a third of what the US counterpart will be, but that same human being is spending 5 times more time on the phone
Mm,
than the American counterpart.
right.
And as a result, the Dell company realized, well, why are we doing this? Just go ahead and bring it back to, the United States. I think that we're going to see something similar to that with artificial intelligence, investing mass amounts into a hope and a dream that in some cases will be realized, but in many cases not living up to the grandiose utopia view that I think people have been sold a bill of goods on.
Yeah, my view on it is used correctly, it's a magnificent augmentation of the things we do in everyday life, but not always a replacement. And so there's so much talk, there's talk about AI replacing lawyers, and it's just like, well, not so fast. I think the information is available, but it is the expertise. So to your point, of a customer service rep having to spend twice as much time because they lack that expertise. They may be at a cheaper rate, but they don't have the applied science, if you will, to be able to move through some of these issues. And I was joking because I use I use a lot of the things, chat and Claude and all of those things. And I'd asked them, I was trying to put together some content about the government shutdown, and it responded, "There hasn't been a government shutdown since 2019." And I was like, "No, sir, we're in the middle of one right now." So you have to trust but verify, right? And there have been so many lawyers who have actually been taken to task for citing hallucinated cases and things. So it's like, even if they give you the cite, you got to go pull the case. You have to verify that what it's giving you is correct. But in terms of, giving you better sentence structure and things like that, fantastic. I am somebody who I love to write. I hold on to it for too long. So I love being able to use, the large language models to help cut that process down. But you still got to go read the sentence. Does it make sense? Like what, what's in there?
One of the things that I will share with you, which in my opinion is actually surprising to me, as a result of AI and the ability to almost perfect deep fakes. And for those that are listening or watching, if you're not familiar with the term deep fake, is the ability to use video recording software. And you only need about 10 to 20 seconds of a human being's voice, and you can completely replicate that without really, really looking hard to an untrained eye. You're thinking that you're speaking with an actual individual. But as a result of that, everybody, kind of was thinking about with COVID, everybody working from home, kind of jolted socio-cultural norms in the United States. And then once things kind of came back to normal, people like realized, well, we can actually work more effectively and efficiently from home than spending our time in a car to and from. Maybe, maybe not. But the younger, when I mean younger tail end of Gen Z and the upper end of Alpha are saying that they actually are preferring, they want the opportunity to go back and
Mm,
see people face to face because there's so many things in a digital format that you just can't trust anymore.
yeah. And the whole thing with the voice freaks me out. And so I try to be very mindful of, not leaving voicemails or different things that people, because I feel like that's the last hurrah. We've seen images be manipulated, but I'm like, I get really nervous about but
So
now I'm doing this kind of stuff. So I guess that's gone.
before I forget, because obviously this is for generally small business owners, you cannot trivialize this topic that we are covering right now. And I would probably provide the best level of guidance I can give any small, medium sized business owner. Before you're focusing on a transition out plan for employees, before you're even determining what corporate bank account you want to use, if you have your core team and you're seeing them in person, you come up with a challenge response phase, whatever that might be. So then that way, if you have an individual that's posting as your boss saying, oh, hey, man, it's so great to see you. Just so you know, we obviously, as you know, we've been using Chase, but we're going to go over to PNC Bank and this is the account number that we need to change it to. In person, weeks, months, years ago, you already had a challenge response. Yep, more than happy to do that. Hey, when we were at that bar
Mm.
about 4 weeks ago, do you remember the name of that waitress that worked that waited on us? So you have something that the artificial intelligence cannot assimilate to. And if it pauses or is asking different questions or things along those lines, then you've got a pretty solid 99% certainty that you're dealing with a deep fake.
I absolutely love that. I had not one, but twice in the span of 1 week, alleged potential client come into my customer relations manager saying, hey, I've got this great contract I want you to negotiate. I'm going to pay you the money. We'll wire it to you, blah, blah, blah. Started to seem hokey. And finally I was like, hey, you want to hop on a Zoom? And they went away. They went silent. And then I have with friends, we joke, but we're not joking. Like, what's our magic word? Like, like you think of the movie, because you might be at my age range. You think about the movie Ghost and Patrick Swayze, is talking through Whoopi Goldberg and Demi Moore is not believing it. And then he goes, tell her ditto. And Whoopi Goldberg says, like, what the bleep is ditto? And then that stops her dead in her tracks. It's like something only they would know.
Right,
So
exactly.
that's what he's talking about, folks. That what is some like a human interaction that only that person would know to help you validate before you turn over the keys to your castle. I have a very selfish question. It's off topic. I My daggone emails keep showing up on the dark web. What the heck am I supposed to do? I changed the password, but it's like they already have it. So I can't be the only person this happens to repeatedly. My credit bureaus are like, we're concerned. We see your email on the dark web. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do about that?
Yeah, so great question. So there's a couple of basic hygiene steps that can be done. Is one, you can set up if you have Google, they have some mechanisms for that. If you're using Microsoft Outlook, they have some mechanisms for that. But what you want to do some Google research on is an acronym called DKIM. And basically, once you have that capability enabled in your email, it makes it more challenging for somebody to spoof it or get access to it. Also, regardless of how low on the totem pole you think your organization is, implement multi-factor authentication. Again, Outlook, web-based, Google, Enterprise, Microsoft Outlook, they all have it now. It's generally included at no additional charge. Yes, I understand. You may have to scan a QR code. You may have to add one more thing. But the reality is I'm sorry, an additional 10 seconds a day out of your life is not going to be a game changer for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I want to get you out here on this. I ask all my guests this question. When you hear do small business like a big boss, what does that mean to you?
I would say, at least from Carter Schoenberg's perspective, is most small business owners are taking a narrative of I'm capable of doing this or I am capable of doing that. You have to pivot away from the cultural paradigm of you to a larger organization because you're still you, regardless if you clock out at 5 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever. You're still Aisha. I'm still Carter. I never say to a client, even when I have my own business, well, Carter's capable of doing this or Carter's capable of doing that. It's always the Acme company strives to be able to do A, B, and C to provide client support to achieve these particular results. Regardless of if you're a one-person company or a 10-person company, how you present yourself matters. Biases exist. First impressions are very relevant. The things that you want to consider. What type of font are you using in your communications? What style of communications are you leveraging? What does your corporate website look like? If it looks like it was just thrown together with a free app on Wix, again, it's going to come across. Also, how are you communicating? Not just in writing, but orals. These are things that are very important. And I would probably also say one of the things that goes overlooked more often than not is being able to look for mentors that are at some point in time, they were where you are now, and they have been able to provide a track record of success on advancing their capabilities. And it doesn't make any difference because, again, it's the old adage, the CEO that got you to 1,000 is not the one that gets you to 1,000,000. The one that gets you to 1,000,000 is not the one that gets you to 10, and the one that got you to 10 is not the one that gets you to 100. These are not just colloquialisms. These are, economical facts and reality. So these are the things that they take into consideration. If you do not participate in things like masterclass, these are things that bear relevance to how you are being perceived by not only your internal staff, not only your business associates, but your potential business prospects as well.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you just really breaking down some wonderful gems for us about cybersecurity, how to keep your organizations more secure, and the best practices and maturity models that we need to adopt in our businesses, no matter the size, to make sure that we're protected. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And for my bosses out there, build it messy, build it scared, but don't build it small. If you like this episode, please make sure that you subscribe, and you hit that download button. And until then, we will see you next time on Do Small Business Like a Big Boss. Later.